Namah Arya Walogide Shwaraya Sasrabujaya Om Namostude Prasiddha Warado Babwami Swaha Namah Arya Walogide Shwaraya Sasrabujaya Om Namostude Prasiddha Warado Babwami Swaha Namah Arya Walogide Shwaraya Sasrabujaya Om Namostude Prasiddha Warado Babwami Swaha.
Welcome, everyone. We welcome you with gratitude and thank you for joining us today for this talk. What we just listened to is the chanting of the Great Compassion Heart Mantra. You can find the track on our website's music page. It's at dinyantemple.org/music. And our theme today is around the Six Pāramitās, through which we know what is it to be a bodhisattva, to have the kind of body, mind, and heart that exemplify generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. These are what we want to explore with you today, and to touch into what it means to have a loving heart, a courageous heart in the midst of uncertainties and while facing all sorts of situations in life. So during this talk, I will go through the first three paramita one by one to elaborate not only the meanings, but also the applications of these qualities or actions, and also ways to incorporate them into our daily life. Since what we want, I believed, is to let our knowledge shape our thinking and transform our way of life by diligently cultivating ourselves on our spiritual path. In Mahayana Buddhism, paramita is described in Buddhist commentaries such as such noble qualities generally associated with enlightened beings. The six paramitas, or transcendent perfection, are an essential concept in the practice of Mahayana Buddhism. The earliest source text for the paramitas comes from the Buddha himself in the form of Prajnaparamita Sutras. Paramita is often translated in English as perfection. It means completeness in the most limitless measure. It means great perfection, great completeness, the noblest, most excellent, highest quality to attain. And then Esoteric Buddhism, which is also part of the Mahayana Buddhism, which stresses the altruistic path of bodhisattvas. The six paramita are considered the necessary practice for one to actualize wisdom and compassion, so that one can obtain enlightenment by becoming a bodhisattva. The six paramita are referred to as transcendental actions, but transcendental here does not refer to some external reality, but rather to the way in which we conduct our lives and perceive the world. Transcendental actions means actions or attitudes are performed in a non-egocentric manner. So the Sanskrit word itself, paramita, carries two layers of meaning. By itself, paramita means perfection or completeness. The word is also a compound of parama and ita. Parama means the other shore, as opposed to where you are right now, on this shore where you're standing. So the other shore is a metaphor for enlightenment. Ita means that which has arrived. So Pāramitā perfection means gone beyond. It means the one who has arrived on the other shore, the being who has attained enlightenment. So the word is giving us some kind of a role model, such as the Bodhisattva, who depart from this shore of conventional reality, this shore of suffering, and cross the water and get to that perfect shore, the other shore of enlightenment, the other shore of nirvana, which is free from dualism, free from suffering, free from mental defilements and their consequences. And speaking of consequences of our doing, whether it's mind action or body action, it's important to understand karma before we go into the 6 Pāramitās. Karma is the law of cause and effect that determines all existence. That's why ethics is stressed in Buddhism, which means to live mindfully, be mindful with every thought, every word of our speech, and each of our actions, whether positive or negative, and be mindful of the consequences generated by every action in the short, medium, or long term. By keeping this law or karma in mind, we can progress on our spiritual path from moment to moment. This mindfulness is really the key. So the 6 Pāramitās provide us a wonderful list of these very important qualities and liberating actions for practitioners to cultivate all aspects of their lives. They provide an outlook for a complete Buddhist path for living. Each perfection is more difficult to practice and more subtle than the preceding perfection from which it develops, starting from the first perfection, generosity. If we practice generosity, that means we're not attached to what we own and do not seek to acquire further possessions. We're in a good position to maintain ethical discipline. And while practicing non-violence, if we can have forbearance, if we can tolerate suffering and bear harm from the living being and the inanimate, we can undertake any task without feeling discouraged and have benevolent tolerance for those who might have harmed us. After this has been developed, the resultant energy enables us to make joyous effort in positive actions of all kinds. These causes then give rise to the concentration of mind, the single-pointedness of a calmly abiding mind, which is required for us to grasp the truths of reality through clear insight. Generally speaking, the practice of the first perfection, generosity, discipline, and patience, is particularly directed toward others' benefit, at least on the surface level, while the practice of the last 2 perfections, meditation and wisdom, is crucial for personal development. The fourth perfection, diligence, then is vital for both cases, whether for the benefits of others or of oneself. In our daily practice, in our everyday practice, the 6 perfections sort of serve as a reminder that can motivate us to reflect on our own mind and the progress of our cultivation. Just like one of the conversation recorded in Confucius Analects, Confucius student Zhengzi says, "Each day I examine myself in 3 ways. In doing things for others, have I been disloyal? In my interactions with friends, have I been untrustworthy? Have I not practiced what I have preached?" So similarly with Pāramitās, we can practice them in a similar approach. Have I practiced generosity, the giving of myself with pure intention? Have I practiced virtue and morality through proper conduct? Have I been patient or practiced benevolence, tolerance, or have I let ego take control? Have I practiced diligently and not forgotten my determination and resolution to attain enlightenment? Have I sustained my equanimity and serenity with a clear mind that is constantly aware of the true nature of things? And lastly, have I seen myself clearly with clear insight and transcendent wisdom? And not just once, twice, or thrice a day with these reflections. Meditation or having a meditative mind is about cultivating the constant awareness to constantly live mindfully, which requires instant realization and reflection and instant mind transformation. That is the very shortcut for one to attain enlightenment. And everything we do is practice, is meditation. There is no separation between what we do and practice itself, so that we can truly embody what we believe and think through both our mind action and body actions. As Mahayana practitioners, we want to generate bodhicitta, the awakening mind, which refers to a deeper desire to achieve awakening in order to benefit all sentient beings. And in our lineage, we often say that one teaching of Vajrayana, that the approach of our practice is to transform poisons into wisdom. For example, we have desire. Desire is empty in its nature, like all other things. There is no ultimate definition. But depending on the situation, desire is a double-edged sword. We can attach to our desire and let it control us, or we can put desire into practice, into wisdom, executing that desire by generating the great aspiration to liberate oneself in order to liberate all beings. And here, our wish or aspiration to possess an excellent body and mind is first and foremost for the benefits of others. Thus, the importance of the practice of the Six Pāramitās. And by fulfilling the needs of others through practicing the six perfections, everything we wish for ourselves will naturally be accomplished. And gradually, we're able to liberate ourselves from cyclic existence like bodhisattvas in the past, whose practice of the Pāramitās give rise to perfect or complete enlightenment. That is a state beyond both worldly existence and any being's personal and inner peace, a state in which all six perfections, generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom, have been perfected. In this sense, the six perfections are not only the causes, but also the result of one's cultivation. Generosity, dana paramita, is the first perfection of the bodhisattva path. Generosity is the willingness to give. Its practice consists of willingly giving one's body, possessions, or positive energy. So in general, there are three ways of giving. Besides giving one's material wealth, there are the giving of dharma, to share the teachings, the giving of courage to help others overcome fear. No matter which way and what to give, the practice of dana, generosity, helps nourish one's bodhicitta, the awakening mind, that aspires to attain awakening in order to liberate all sentient beings. And we know the famous three poisons in Buddhism, which are the primary causes that keep sentient beings trapped in the samsara, because of the three poisons lead to the creation of karma, which leads to rebirth in the six realms of samsara. They are greed, hatred, and ignorance. So the first paramita, generosity, is the very treatment for one to overcome and transform their greed and miserliness. As this quality, greed or miserliness, is an aspect of clinging attachment that generates suffering. However, simply overcoming miserliness is not enough with the practice of generosity. How do we measure the perfection of the practice of generosity? It has to do with one's intention. It is not measured by how much poverty one has alleviated, but by how complete one's willingness to give. So the internal question to ask is, have I practiced generosity, the giving of myself, with pure intention? Which means to practice generosity with no hidden agendas, nor expectations of reward or personal gain. With the right intention, the right action will follow, since generosity expresses itself in action. So how do we develop and increase generosity to strengthen that cause and intention? We can start to reflect on, first, the disadvantages of attachment and clinging, and second, the many benefits of giving. As recorded in the Samadhi Raja Sutra, the King of Meditative Stabilization Sutra, in the 36th chapter, the Buddha addresses to Ananda, one of his principal disciples, on the topics of the consequences of attachment and clinging. When living beings who have attachment to this body, which is constantly decaying, and to this life, which is transient and beyond their control, which is like a dream or an illusion, they fall under the power of ignorance and create extreme dreadful karma. Devoid of wisdom, following Mara, they are reborn in a terrible health. So we may tend to think that the self of ours have some independent and true existence, but that is an illusion. We procrastinate or tend to live in the future, thinking about today or the day after instead of living the present moment because of the illusions of our life force, which seems to be enduring. Sometimes I think all of us would unconsciously feel that we would live forever, or at least for a very long time. We also have attachment for our dwellings, certain places, and our countries, which creates conflicts with the ever-changing and unstable nature of things. No matter how much we cling to resist change, our body, where we live, and our possessions are all under the law of impermanence, and all physical things disintegrate in the end. And this attachment to the illusions of the self and the things is what stops us from being generous because of our clinging attitude toward our body and property, which we view as permanent, or at least we would wish so. Good thing is, if we let go of our attachment, there wouldn't be any conflict. And letting go is not pessimistic. It is about developing greater willingness to part with what is ours with positive purposes. It is letting go with grace by giving to others what you can now and deepening your intention to become able to let go of what you find most difficult to relinquish. If we understand impermanence and are genuinely compassionate, we will see our possessions differently. If we understand impermanence thoroughly, we can accept that when we move on to the next life, We cannot take anything with us except our karma. So why are our possessions not in reality others' belongings, which they have entrusted to us for safekeeping, and which must be returned to them? If we can accept this view, it changes our attitude, and our properties would not be a source of anxiety. Just imagine the mind of a hoarder who must constantly keep their things safe and the amount of anxiety they might have. On the other hand, in the process of letting go, of becoming more generous, we create merits. As the saying goes, as you give, you shall receive. Merit is a very unique concept in Buddhism. It is as if our cultivation is about making our cups. This is the cup analogy from our guru. If we only have a small cup, then how can we receive more blessing than our cup can hold? So to accumulate true merit through the practice of dana, it all depends on how pure our intentions are when we give. Remember, paramita means transcendent perfection, so we can see for ourselves the degree of perfection of the practice of generosity and increase the ability to practice generosity with no expectations for rewards. That's the pureness of heart. And when we make offerings to the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha, it is not because the Buddhas need anything, but is to help us soften the ego and the attachment to the self and create meritorious deeds and merit. When we give, what we give doesn't even need to be physical, be it a praying mudra, a phrase, a heartfelt respect and admiration, or learning text by heart or reciting mantra with the wish to benefit others. With all these actions of generosity, our Buddha nature is being nurtured. And while walking on the Bodhisattva path in the same chapter of Samadhi Raja Sutra, the Buddha also speaks about the giving of oneself for bodhisattvas who have already attained some degree of awakening, that they should give up living happily in solitude, solitary places and forests, and enter the villages, the towns, the market towns, the regions, the kingdom, the capital, and district capitals, and teach the Dharma to beings so that beings can attain irreversible progress toward enlightenment. This is the giving of Dharma to share the teachings to benefit others, besides helping others by giving material support. Bodhisattvas practice generosity while maintaining the excellent motivation to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. There is always this quality, the readiness to give everything, whether it's their body, possessions, positive energy, or spiritual powers. They practice as many forms of giving as possible to perfect their generosity paramita and make it complete. But keep in mind that the Six Pāramitā is a list of 6 transcendent actions. So the practice of any of these 6 perfections is not without the practice of the other 5. Generosity alone will not protect us from bad rebirth, which result from negative actions. That is why for bodhisattvas, with their level of cultivation, they are able to incorporate skillful means into their acts of generosity, meaning to give only what's appropriate in a particular situation. And to know what is appropriate to give and in the right moment requires wisdom, through the complete cultivations of all perfections. Otherwise, for instance, sometimes when we give, even upon request, the recipients might show dissatisfaction or more demands, which may trigger us to feel angry. That is why we need to practice patience, which is the third paramita. Patience here means a kind of rational, benevolent tolerance out of your compassion for the beings you're dealing with. But for now, before we move on to the second paramita, I invite you to take a moment to meditate with me on the first perfection, Dana Paramita. You can read with me out loud or in your mind, or just listen to these words mindfully. You can first take a deep breath in and long breath out, being fully present, the body and the mind, being here and now. If we understand impermanence and are genuinely compassionate, we will see our possessions differently. Giving is a wish-granting jewel. Giving is the best tool to transform miserliness. May we give without humiliating the recipient of our generosity. Give without condescension, competitiveness, or pride. True love and compassion are realistic, spacious, and allow others freedom. Give without discouragement. Give with joy, with pure intention. Give liberally as a bodhisattva, and follow the good path of giving of one's body, possessions, and virtue in a complete and pure way.有缘. The second perfection is Shila Paramita, discipline perfection. It's about ethical disciplines, austerity, proper conduct, or upholding the precepts. Whether one is a layperson or ordained, the role of ethics is very important. And when talking about discipline in Buddhism, let's not try to understand this concept through the lens of our worldly laws or rules, as its practice a tool for our inner transformation. That's why it's the second transcendent action of the Six Pāramitā. We practice to complete the perfection of discipline for our inner transformation. It serves to liberate us, not to constrain us. So it's not the same how we view rules and criteria in our human society. As humans, we are capable of sensing the difference between appropriate and inappropriate actions because we know what we need emotionally: love, connection, belonging, trust, and growth. All of these will need us to cultivate the right speech, right conduct, and then the right livelihood to complete the discipline perfection. All of these emotional needs exist because we prefer things or people that are beneficial and wholesome and bring happiness. While all of us pursue happiness, I don't think pursue should be the right verb here, nor is conventional happiness the right object. The aim should be to sustain a kind of higher transcendent happiness, but it's quite easy for us to fall for temporary pleasure that others bring us, which might be ultimately detrimental. Or we might be the one to bring this kind of short-lived happiness to others. Neither is actually considered virtuous, and both create harm. In simply following our desires and acting impulsively without the proper consideration for the consequences, we would plant many seeds for the negative karma. So it's the practice of generosity that opens our heart and helps us rid of some attachment to the self and to the worldly concerns. Discipline, perfection, or good ethics serves as the foundation for the growth of all noble qualities. As the Buddha used the analogy of the earth, which supports everything animate and inanimate, discipline and good ethics are like the earth. They are the foundation. Nagarjuna, the Indian Mahayana Buddha thinker, who is also being considered the common patriarch of all 8 Chinese schools of Buddhism. In his letter to a friend, Nagarjuna tells the king, "The subduer said care is the source of nectar, carelessness the source of death. Therefore, to increase virtuous conduct, always take interest in cultivating care." For the practice of true ethical discipline, the foundation is the cultivation of conscientious care, which prevents us from being disturbed from disturbing emotions. So cultivating conscientious care is the foundation that leads to all other noble qualities and sustaining happiness. How do we cultivate care and conscientiousness? They are cultivated by employing mindfulness and mental alertness, and by developing a sound sense of self-respect and decency to guard the mind from the tyranny of the disturbing emotions. Conscientiousness in resisting the disturbing emotions is the source of the nectar of immortality, as being said in Nagarjuna's letter. Because conscientiousness enables us to gain freedom from cyclic existence. Otherwise, we continue to experience many forms of pain and suffering associated with birth, sickness, aging, and death, and all the frustrating situation we encounter being in samsara. And from the perspective of the reincarnation system, reincarnation is the belief that our soul or spirit, after biological death, begins a new life in a new body that may be human, animal, or spirit, depending on the moral quality or the merits accumulated of the previous life's action. The capability to differentiate appropriate and inappropriate actions set us apart from animals. And we shouldn't take this gift of cognitive ability for granted, since it makes a huge difference between with or without this ability for our spiritual cultivation. Just to serve as an example, a hypothesis for the importance of having the ability to practice discipline due to past life merit. If I in this life have perfected my generosity, the first paramita, to a certain degree, but disregarded the practice of all other paramitas, maybe in my next life I will rebirth as a cat, living in a luxurious home because of my cultivation with generosity in my prior life. But as a cat, even though living comfortably, I wouldn't have the ability to tell right from wrong, basically incapable of discriminating between wholesome and unwholesome actions. Then I wonder what I would be in the following life without such a cognitive ability that humans possess, and which would be so beneficial for one's spiritual cultivation. So our rebirth really depends on our merits or demerits. That's just part of our karma. It is understood that the merits, the resources we have in this life are the results of our cultivation from past lives. But even though we have some future resources, they would be wasted or drained unless we can use them in a human or celestial rebirth. Thus, the importance of discipline and the preciousness of a human life. While ethical discipline from our conventional view mainly concerns our physical and verbal behaviors, our state of mind is the one that's in control, that influences all we do. Everything is determined by the mind. So we must use this precious time of ours, our precious human rebirth, to cultivate the discipline of our body, speech, and mind until the manifestations of the behavior show positive changes and we are able to sustain the higher state of peace and happiness. Through the practice of Shila Paramita, virtue or merits can be accumulated through our day-to-day activities, such as eating and sleeping. Eating moderately is the practice of discipline. Eating with gratitude for the food, and meditating or praying before eating to help the rebirth process of the animals is the practice of discipline. As our guru often says, what you like to eat, eat less. What you don't like to eat more. This is the practice of discipline. And it is not just about eating. This teaching can be applied to everything. It's about the cultivation of renunciation and forbearance. So the first step of the cultivation of discipline begins within. We gain this cognitive ability to be reborn as a human, so we must utilize it for our enlightenment. What we do is to establish our criteria, remain mindful of them, and check our thoughts and actions, the mind action, the body actions repeatedly during each day. Even in dreams, that's the hard part. But the criteria is not for us to judge whatever that's going on with us as good or bad, which would strengthen the dualistic thinking. The point of practicing discipline is not to restrain us, but through changing our habitual mechanism. Many constructs are dissolved. The mind is therefore transformed and we feel liberated. And as Mahayana practitioners with the aspiration to be a bodhisattva, every time when we feel tempted to do something negative or having negative thoughts, we should have the sense of self-respect as a decent person, as a practitioner, and also being mindful of how our actions would appear to those we look up to would be helpful with our directions of self-cultivation. This kind of self-discipline serves as our protection, and if all individuals are able to do so, we wouldn't need all the worldly laws as constraints which strengthen the dualistic mind. The practice of discipline starts from within also because those qualities that contribute to our well-being, such as benevolence, tolerance, and patience, do not arise from the suppression of anger or hatred. There is no true peace and harmony when there is resentment being buried under. For instance, sometimes I think I'm angry with others, but in reality I'm angry with myself. Sometimes I become judgmental because maybe I'm not at peace with my own life. But these reactions most of the time are defensive mechanisms that make us blinder to the reality of things. And in those moments of mindless reactions, I react without being mindful and let those disturbing emotions take control of me. The practice of discipline starts from within because the inner transformation should be our foremost goal, so that we don't live with the conditioned mind that is susceptible to disturbing emotions that keep us in suffering. The great Indian master Atisha set us an inspiring example, which is to purify all our faults daily before each day ends. So the practice of discipline is about being constantly aware of one's conduct, whether it's in our mind or already manifested in our behaviors. And when it's the wrong ones, one should be able to reflect and correct oneself on the spot, not later, and not for others, not for the Buddha, but for oneself. The constant practice of discipline by constantly checking our minds prevents us from making the same mistake again and again, and helps us reconcile with ourselves in a thorough manner. It is really liberating, actually, in the process, the letting go of one's ego, no matter how embarrassed or how much angst one might experience during the contemplation. It takes courage and thorough self-honesty to recognize and acknowledge one's faulty thoughts and actions. That is self-discipline. That is making progress in one's self-cultivation. It's a blissful feeling at the end through the practice of discipline, which is not restraining, but rather liberating, because you're doing it for yourself, not for anybody else. And with the aspiration in mind to become awakened so that we can help liberate other sentient beings, we would immediately have so much courage to perform that self-honesty and to work on ourselves to attain irreversible progress toward enlightenment. In terms of the helpful counteractions for our faults, they are the power of faith, the power of counteractive behavior, the power of regret, and the power of promise. The power of faith is not about following anything blindly, not looking for a safe harbor with some community, but in taking refuge in the three jewel in a heartfelt way. Sincerity thus arises, also the altruistic intention, and the ego is softened. In those moments, many things are purified instantly. Counteractive behavior is any positive actions undertaken as a purificatory measure. This may consist of prostrations or offerings, cultivating generosity, compassion, and love, or it can be any consciously kind-hearted actions. Or we can contemplate that the doer of the negative action, the action, and the objects in relation to which it was performed are all interdependent and at the same time empty of intrinsic existence. This would help us get to the root of our negative actions, which is ignorance, the source of all disturbing emotions. What these actions counteract is our ignorance. And the third one, regret, is important. Regret is the beginning of true repentance. Without regret, there's no complete genuineness with one's acknowledgement with one's deeds. The power of regret involves acknowledging that we have performed a wrong action and recognizing that it will bring suffering if left unpurified. And then after this genuine regret is the power of promise, the not making the same mistake twice promise. Promise would only be strong when the regret is genuine, and repeating one's negative action living with the inner conflicts only create more negative karma. And with the practice of discipline, it is great if you have a spiritual teacher to whom you can turn to for advice and to whom you can acknowledge the mistakes you make. But if you don't, you need to be your own teacher. You can acknowledge your faults and mistakes before an image of the enlightened ones, or just have someone who looks up to you or who you look up to in mind and apply these 4 antidotes. And besides the fact that the practice of discipline is very effective for a disturbed and suffering mind, when we are able to overcome those disturbing emotions thoroughly, we can then help others get out of their troubled thoughts and emotions. What follows that gets aroused in ourselves is the feeling of fulfillment and happiness. The Greek called it eudaimonia. It's a state of mental well-being and helping others in appropriate ways. We gain real fulfillment and sustaining happiness. Otherwise, there will still be self-doubts. So it's through the practice of discipline that we purify ourselves first, to overcome our own disturbed mind first, to have a foundation of self-respect through self-discipline. And after that, that's when we would understand what other beings are dealing with. That's when we can better serve them. That's why bodhisattvas aspire to attain enlightenment, because with that kind of wisdom, they can do so much more. So the teachings of the 6 Pāramitās are not a system of rules, nor a fixed code of conduct to which we must adhere. But spiritual practice consists of knowing the teaching and implementing them in such a way that they bring about an inner transformation that extends and broadens our perspective beyond its currently narrow limits, so that our awareness can be expanded. So again, before we move on to the next paramita, I invite you to take a moment to meditate with me on the discipline perfection, Shila Paramita. Take a deep breath in and a long breath out, being fully present, being here and now. You can read with me or just listen to these words mindfully. We all have the power to purify our body, speech, and mind. Faults, mistakes, and disturbing emotions are only temporary blemishes, which can be removed. Ethical conduct is water that washes the stains of faulty action. Discipline is the moonlight that dispels the hot torment of disturbing emotions. We carefully watch our physical, verbal, and mental activities. Cultivation of such mindfulness stabilizes our mind. 有缘. Now we move on to the last paramita for today's talk, Kshanti Paramita, the perfection of patience. Let's start with the passage from the Diamond Sutra. The Buddha addresses Subhuti, one of the Buddha's 10 principal disciples. Subhuti, the Tathagata speaks of the perfection of patience, which is not, but is called the perfection of patience. Why? Because, Subhuti, in a past life, when my body was mutilated by Kali Raja, I had at that time no notion of an ego, a personality, a being, and a life. Why? Because in the past, when my body was dismembered, if I held the concept of an ego, a personality, a being, and a life. I would have been stirred by the feelings of anger and hatred. The patient's perfection is after the generosity and discipline perfections. A person can have cultivated the beauty of letting go through the practice of generosity and some degree of sustaining peace of mind through the practice of discipline in a protected environment, such as in their home or in their own sitting meditation that's in a controlled environment. But once that person comes out of their home or their controlled environment, they face all sorts of challenges that is imposed by other people. And the person may realize their unrealized triggers that are ruining the peace of mind they've cultivated from before. Therefore, patience is a perfection to be attained. The quality of patience encompasses a spectrum of similar virtues such as endurance, tolerance, forbearance, resistance, perseverance, and unconditional acceptance. Generally, it includes three types of patience: ordinary patience, dharma patience, and patient belief in the truth of no birth, which are argued by Nagarjuna, the common patriarch and Indian Buddhist philosopher who we've mentioned before. In his book, Commentary on the Great Perfection of Wisdom, Nagarjuna wrote about these three types of patience. Ordinary patience means to have patience, tolerance, and forbearance living among all sentient beings. While facing all sorts of harm and hardships in one's living environment, there is not an ounce of hatred in one's heart. While facing offering and reverence from sentient being, one doesn't gloat or react internally in exaltation. This is the way of the Bodhisattvas. We can see that here patience and tolerance is about having equanimity. When people attack me, my heart is at peace, and others' negative behavior do not arouse any hatred. And when people praise me, my heart is not cheering for myself. From this equanimity thus arises the great compassion that is equally benefiting all sentient being without differentiation or prejudice. The mind follows one's great compassion, not following the ever-changing external phenomena. This is the practice of ordinary patience. And in the worldly sense, when people attack us, that is a kind of insult. But in the Buddhist perspective, if those abusive actions we receive are insult, then all the sufferings are considered insults, including how we are treated when we get sick or age naturally, when we might be troubling others and others want to stay away from us. There is actually no difference, and they're all insults for us to accept. This acceptance is about the practice of patience. This kind of insult doesn't just happen to us humans. If you observe ants, you will find that those old ants walk slower and those young ones would kind of stay out of your way. Isn't that a bit of an insult for the old ants? So ordinary patience is that all-encompassing tolerance, acceptance, while living in this world filled with suffering. Acceptance of the positivity and also acceptance of the negativity. Dharma patience is patience attained through Dharma. It is about patiently gaining certainty with regard to the teachings. It entails hearing the words, taking in their meaning, thinking about it till you gain a sense of certainty, and then integrating what you have understood into your life by contemplating it over and over again. Dharma teaches us the reality of things. It teaches us the world consists of consciousness, filters, and phenomena. These three things purely. When we study the Dharma, we shouldn't let our subjectivity mislead us and misunderstand the teaching. Cultivating a clear mind that can see through our own subjectivity is the patience of Dharma practice. Dharma patience. Buddhism teaches the non-dual reality, so we see many phrases in the scripture that are seemingly self-contradicting, such as these lines in the Heart Sutra. The great virtue has no virtue. The great knowing do not know. The great diligence is like idleness. The great purity is like defilement. When we read something like this, our dualistic mind might start to fight the idea of black is not black but white is not white but black. But think this is pure and think that this is pure nonsense and miss the point of the teaching. The practice of Dharma patience is to have that sustaining concentration and equanimous mind when we study the Dharma or any knowledge that we decide to attain but which seems abstruse at first. Without such patience, we would create more and more mental blockages for ourselves, and that's kind of a self-sabotaging behavior. When we study the Dharma, if you like and value the teachings, your physical and verbal behavior will express your belief and respect for the Buddha from whom they originate, and for those who pass the teachings on to you. You will revere the books that contain the teachings and not treat them as you might as a garbage writing. And then the last kind of patience, the tolerance of non-arising dharmas, also called the patient beliefs in the truth of non-rebirth, is a philosophical one. From Mahayana teachings, we learned about the beginningless and endlessness of our life, or more accurately, of our consciousness. Death in this life is not the ultimate ending. Birth in this life is not the beginning of everything. The acceptance of this beginningless and endless of life is the patient belief in the truth of reincarnation in the samsara, and the truth of non-rebirth when one has exhausted their karma and attained nirvana, getting out of the samsara and entering a sustaining state, which also has no beginning and no ending. There's no doubt, no fear in thinking about, believing, or living according to these truths. This is attained through the completion of tolerance of non-arising dharmas. Like the other 5 perfections, kshanti, patience, must be cultivated constantly. This is the only way to be prepared when provocative circumstances arise, whether externally or internally. In our daily life, the practice of patience also helps us cultivate gratitude, which is an important positive cause for us to keep going no matter what we face. As we cultivate patience and infuse it with compassion, our simple patience becomes benevolent tolerance. Just as we cannot hold the instructions for practice unless a spiritual teacher passes them to us, we cannot develop the transcendent patience without being exposed to harm. In this sense, whoever that harms us is our teacher of patience. We should be grateful. It is the same how the saying goes, the A students don't make a good teacher, but the C students do. When the great Indian master Atisha set out for Tibet, he took with him one of his students, a particularly bad-tempered scholar. His other companions were very surprised and urged Atisha to leave him behind, but Atisha insisted, saying that this was his teacher of patience. The story goes that he sent the scholar home once they reached Tibet, not because Atisha doesn't think he's a teacher of patience anymore, but, but because there were a lot more teachers of patience over there. The teaching on how to practice patience challenges us to act in a way which totally contradicts conventional norms of behavior. In the current world, praise, reward, respect, and service are considered highly desirable, but the teachings draw our attention to the dangers which lie in our response to them. And cheating is a common issue that bothers many people in a relationship. The practice of patience is the very practice that our guru gave to some of our disciples that encountered this issue. He asked them to offer to send their positive intentions to their partners and the other person in their meditation, to wish them well, or even help raise their children instead of sending negative intentions and trying to make their lives miserable. And at the end of the day, the practice of patience benefits the one who practices it the most. That's what's important, because when we are not well, how can we serve ourselves or others well? Here's an inspirational passage from Shantideva, the 8th century Indian Buddhist philosopher. Let us sit together one more time in our upright posture with a still mind. Read together. Causes for happiness are intermittent, and there are many more causes of pain. Without pain, there is no wish for liberation. Therefore, mind, remain firm. So thank you all for being here today and listening to this talk on the first Pāramitās. 有缘